Righty, hello everyone, and welcome to our last Simon Says for this year. So today I thought I'd talk about something that's close to my heart and something that I know a little bit about as well. Spoken a lot about science, given my science background, but I thought, hey, I'm a teacher by day. I'm sure I can talk about some of my teaching, skills and knowledge as well. So today we're going to have a look at that and seeing how learning about learning can teach us about the teacher. Because like everything, well, like a lot of things that we do, God had a design for life as we know it. And, most of the things that we do reflect an essence of him. And so teaching is just part of that because he teaches us day by day as we journey with him as well. All right. So just in general, we're going to have a think about God's relationship with us is affected by, the teacher-student relationship, but also how we can share with each other as well. And so I'm going to talk about those ideas through four particular little aspects from teaching. So any teachers will be familiar with these words. They might be new for us, but that's all right. We'll learn them as we go. They're chunking, differentiation, stories, and relationship. So let's dive in. So teaching is a bit like an onion. So like an onion or an ogre, it has a lot of layers. So teaching concepts have a number of layers. Their application, because like I said, it's intrinsic to what we do in life. It's similar to how God journeys with us. He teaches us day by day as well. And even going to university to learn to be a teacher, you're a student, but also a teacher at the same time. You get this weird dichotomy, yin and yang, I suppose, of how that all works. So obviously what applies to God's relationship with us and how we learn from him, we can apply that in how we teach students if we're in a position to be teaching, or even how we can just interact with others, how we learn and share along the way. And so this presentation is going to have multiple layers in that regard. Every single topic we look at, I'm going to talk about how teaching, specifically works in a classroom, but also how that can affect how we deal with others, and also how that relates to God and how he relates to us as well. All right, so let's talk about chunking. That's a very informal name. It's affectionately known by teachers. It's a teaching term for just making sure that people don't bite off more than they can chew. You can't throw differential calculus at grade ones. It's not going to work. First, they need to learn how to add. They need to know how numbers work. They need to know how to count. And so by breaking concepts down into their tiny little discrete individual chunks, we can make it nice and manageable so that they can learn and master each step along the way and avoid information overload. And so teachers might do these things like breaking down a text into stages and reading them separately. You might read an introduction from an information text and then start to have a look at some of the main points, then the conclusions separately, and then kind of piece it all together at the end. Like I said, with maths, you want to step it into step stages across maybe multiple lessons or multiple activities within a lesson, and focusing on key terminology to make sure that they understand the words, because otherwise they're going to have a bad time. And so, yeah, it's simply the idea of not biting off more than we can chew. And so we see this in the Bible where God chunked himself to mankind. He couldn't reveal himself in one go because it would blow our puny little minds. And because he is so big and his character is so vast, we've kind of had to catalog that and learn each aspect of that through the Bible. And so chronologically in the Bible, he revealed himself, first to Adam and Eve and, the early humans he spoke and walked with. But in terms of the journey of Israel, it started with one man. God appeared to Abraham. He journeyed with him. And then from that, he grew to revealing himself to one family. So the Bible says that he was referred to himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so the patriarchs were, a family that God revealed himself to. And so over the generations, they grew to be a nation, Israel, as they were living in Egypt. And then as Israel were liberated in Exodus and moving through the wilderness. And then moving through the New Testament, revealing to all nations. So in Galatians 4, it says, he redeemed us through the blessing given to Abraham, so that the Gentiles, that's you and me today, those of us who aren't Jewish by birth, can come to know God. So by faith, we can receive the promise of the Spirit. And so God progressively revealed himself. And so it wasn't just in terms of the number of people he was in contact with, it was also to do with his character and his fullness. And so we saw a really clear example of this on Mount Sinai when the Israelites first escaped to Egypt and went through the Red Sea, and God was like God was drawing them to, hey, I'm here, I'm on this mountain, you should come meet me, I'm really excited. But as we know, Israel were a bit freaked out. God was doing all this big miraculous stuff. They were fearful of the big scary mountain. They're fearful of the storm. And Moses ended up having to go to speak with God one-on-one. And even when he came back, he had a glowing face, and that freaked the people out. And so he wore a veil and that kind of thing. And so that resulted in the Israelites making a golden calf idol. It was, something they could understand, a discrete object. And they're saying they weren't just making another god. They were saying that this is their physical incarnation of the God that saved them. And so it shows to me that they just couldn't quite grasp his fullness. And so God had to reveal himself in stages throughout the Bible. And then, of course, in the New Testament, we had Jesus in the flesh. And then now today, we have the Holy Spirit living in us. So different aspects of God revealed over time in chunks, if you will. And so how can we apply this? I already said that. So how can we apply this to others when sharing with others, particularly if it's things to do with God? If you want to share about your journey with him, sometimes less is more. So it can be a journey, a step-by-step thing, just little bits at a time. Because as we know, people need time to chew things over, whether it's an intellectual concept or sometimes it's spiritual concepts. This is true for even Christians as well in terms of spiritual concepts. I mean, 1 Corinthians says, I gave you milk, not solid food, because you weren't ready for it. Indeed, you're still not ready. So the Apostle Paul was recognizing that particular church that he was writing to in Corinth weren't yet mature enough. He was kind of grieving that he couldn't give them more amazing new things. No, we need to keep going over the basics. Come on, guys, get with it. And so, in sharing with others, we also need to chunk so that it's appropriate to the place that they're at, so they can get what's out of it. It's not just going to go over their head and be missed. All right, so let's have a look now at differentiation. And so this is a fancy word, but it's basically just the idea that everyone's at a different place and everyone needs to be treated differently according to where they're at. And so if we're a teacher in a classroom, we should be adjusting how we teach and the activities that we set to different students based on where they are. And so some simple examples might be having a range of different texts for students at different reading levels. You might have the chapter book for this kid who's going to go nuts and devour it. You might have some simpler readers with very simple vocabulary and sentences for these guys over here. And the others in the middle, they might have something in between. And then something in maths, you might have the same maths topic, but on different problems. So if we're learning about, calculating area of a shape or the volume, the whiz-bang students, you might give a more complicated shape. We'll have to break it down and manage it. With these guys, you might be starting with cubes just to get their confidence happening. So differentiation is the idea that everyone's at a different place. And so the way we teach and share with them should be different and tailored to them and where they are at. And God does that for us too, because he knows exactly where we're at. He knows what we can handle and what we can't. And so I found a few interesting scenarios through the Bible where God treated people probably a little bit differently to we might have expected or he might have for others. And so an interesting one that always stuck with me with Abraham when he advocated for the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. He was pushing God. He's going back to him. He's going, hey, will you save the city for 50 people? Will you save the city for 45 people? He kept it was like an auction. It's like working him down. Sold. Okay, I won't destroy the city for this many people. And so, God is God. He can do what he likes. But he met Abraham where he was at in terms of, coming to that conclusion. But it turned out that even that smaller number, there weren't enough of those in the city to avoid their destruction. Another one I like is Gideon. So Gideon asks for not just one sign from God, but multiple signs. He's like, okay, can you make the fleece moist and the ground around it dry? Okay, cool. You know what? I'm still not convinced. Can you do it the other way around? Can you make the fleece dry and dew on the ground? And so again, God was very gracious and he did that thing. He provided an extra sign for Gideon, who didn't necessarily strike us as the bravest type to begin with. And another cool one is Saul. He was so set on persecuting Christians that Jesus literally had to stop him in his tracks on the road to Damascus. And boom, appeared, made him blind. So Saul really needed a big wake up. And so that's what God provided for him. And as we know from that, he was able to turn his life around and do some really cool things in the New Testament. And we saw it throughout the Gospels too. Jesus always met people and loved them as they were. But he loved them enough to not leave them as they were. He always helped to show them a new way forward. And that looked different for different people, whether it was the tax collectors corrupting people, encouraging them to turn away from swindling people and give away their money. Or it might have been the woman caught in adultery. He said, I don't condemn you either, but from here go and sin no more. And so he knew where those people are at. He met them where they're at. And he provided that in the perfect, loving way, which still kept them accountable and encouraged them to move on in a positive way. And we know too, in terms of the way that God speaks to people, it comes in different ways. For some people, it's dreams. Some hear an audible voice. Some really connect through worship music or art or science, seeing nature, all different things. God's made us with all these different skills, interests, and personalities, and he reveals himself differently through these different ways, differentiating for each of us. And so how can we differentiate with others? As I mentioned, we know that everyone has their own worldviews and strengths, weaknesses, interests. Everyone has their own approach to doing life. And so for us, if we're going to share with others, if we want to share the gospel, now we need to recognize that a one-size-fits-all approach isn't necessarily going to work. And that's doubly true when you're working across cultures. So, if you go across and as a missionary group and you got a way of doing it this way with this culture, it might not work if you're going to a different country. You can't just copy paste. You need to be really careful about their beliefs and their culture and how they do things. So one example of this that I found interesting is apparently God appears to a lot of Muslims in dreams, because in their culture, dreams are this really high and important thing. And so for Jesus to appear to them in dream form, it's the wake up. They need to go, whoa, that this is real. My approach to God is different to what it might have been beforehand. And so how do we know what's best? How do we know how to share with others? Well, I think it's pretty simple. You can listen, look, or if you're really unsure, you can ask. You can observe people, think about it, just be intentional about how you share, and share in a way that it's going to be unique to that individual. Take that little bit of extra effort and time to think about how that's going to look for the person that you happen to be with at that time. All right, so the next one is stories. And so stories have been demonstrated in psychology literature and the learning literature to have huge benefits for learning. Our brains are just wired to love stories, and that's why we watch movies, we read books, we love music that tells stories, we love video games that tell stories. We just love to hear about narratives, because we're curious to find out what happened at the end, and it's a whole bunch of fun. And so not only are they fun, though, that they're actually really useful as a teaching tool. So they can help us to make connections between different things, because we can see them together in a scenario and how they interact, whether that's a real scenario or an imagined one. And it can allow us to see complex ideas in action. So rather than stepping through, explaining this thing really detailed, if you just see it happening, it allows us to understand that better. And research has shown too that anything shared in a story is about 20 times more memorable than just telling someone a fact and hoping that they'll remember it. And so by embedding things in stories, it makes it more engaging, allows us to examine it from different aspects, and it's more memorable because we know, a story's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's always going to be tension, conflict, resolution. So stories are just fantastic as a teaching tool in a whole range of different ways. And so obviously God is the master storyteller. He's invented history, his story. But even Jesus, when he was on the earth, he was always telling stories in the form of parables. And we have 30 or more parables listed in the Gospels. And so he was trying to share about the kingdom of God. It was very counterintuitive and strange to a lot of people, as they were baffled and amazed by his teaching. The Pharisees in particular were getting things upside down and backwards. And so these stories allowed him to share really complicated and just counterintuitive upside down things of the kingdom, but put it in a way that, was grounded in their everyday and what made sense. So disputes with people in the marketplace, or farming and wealth and just managing life, inheritance, all that kind of stuff. And so he used the stories that were based on where they're at now at that stage. And so for us in a different time, different country, different culture, they can be a bit trickier. But generally, they're enough that we can wrap our heads around it. With a little bit of study, we can really understand the context in which they were placed to get more depth out of that story. And so one example I like about this is the idea of Jesus says that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. So taking on his yoke. And so I used to think of that as being like, you're an ox, you're a workhorse, you put on the yoke, you work for him. Okay, done. But people in that time would know that yokes actually came in pairs. You put an older ox, an experienced one, with a younger ox, and it was literally lead it and teach it the way of, working the land. And so it's not just about working with Jesus and it's easy to work for him. It's that you work with him, you walk with him, you learn from him as you go. And so by just having that little bit of story and that little bit of context, it really brings that idea to life. You can get a lot more depth and understanding out of a simple phrase just like that. And so in addition to the parables themselves, the Bible's full of narratives of the history of the earth. So I've spoken about how the earth was created, the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then the Israelites. It tells the story of their history. And so that in itself is a story. We can learn from the stories, even though it was real events that happen, we can learn from them. In addition to the parables, which are fictional but intended to teach a certain type of concept. All right, in terms of, well, how can I tell stories to others? Should I just make up fables and share those? Well, we all have our own story of our own lives. So testimonies are a really powerful witness. So whether you've been powerfully delivered from a life of drugs and slavery, or whether you've just lived an average Joe life and grown up in a Christian home, your story has a bunch of turning points, a bunch of ups and downs where God has shown up and really impacted you in some way. And so our testimonies are a really powerful way of sharing with others, because we're just hardwired to learn and crave and to understand stories. And so I've always found it interesting that testimonies aren't highly valued in terms of scientific information. So I've gone over this previously. We want to look at meta-analyses of the literature, which are, based on individual analyses, individual experiments, double-blind, placebo-controlled, all that kind of stuff. And then right at the bottom, it has expert testimony. So even an expert with a PhD in that thing, you should take their words with a grain of salt compared to a basic paper, or let alone a meta-analysis of multiple papers. So testimony isn't highly valued in terms of the scientific space or academia. But if I'm interested in, buying a product, if I'm looking at different websites, comparing prices and things, what do I see in business websites? I see testimonies, I see stories. I don't see graphs, I don't see numbers, I don't see data. I see testimonies from probably real people sharing about their story, that experience. I see reviews, people with experiences with that product. And so while testimony isn't valued highly in academia, in terms of businessmen and women know that if you want to share an idea, it needs to be real stories from real people, because that's what people connect with. That's what's going to get results, and that's why businesses use it, even though they're less trustworthy, depending how you look at it. And so with that in mind, I think it's really important that all Christians have a little brief testimony prepared, or a general outline of your life, or even just a few points that you can share. What has he done in your life? If someone just asks you off the cuff, what's with this Jesus stuff? Why is it important to you? I really encourage you to have, a few little points up your sleeve. In 1 Peter 3, it says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, and to do that with gentleness and respect. So your testimony is powerful. It doesn't matter what it is. It's important for us to think on that and to use that, and to just be ready, when the opportunity arises, when people are asking or interested about what that looks like. All right, and lastly, we have relationship. So obviously we know that relationship's important. Every day, we relate to the people around us, and we see the positives and the negatives of that too when things don't go so well. But specifically in teaching, the teacher-student relationship has been shown in the literature to be among the most important variables impacting a student's learning. So, it's not so much the curriculum, it's not so much class sizes or dollars that the school has available. That teacher-student relationship is gold in terms of student learning and the impact on their outcomes. And so we choose to learn, and we choose to take advice from those that we value and take care of us. You're not going to ask a Joe Blow on the street for advice on how to live your life. It may be a trusted friend or a family member. You might learn and take advice from them. And I think everybody's been to school. Everyone had a favorite teacher, and they just, Matt, you can think of all the things that you learn from them in their classroom. But if you flip that, if you had a teacher you don't like, what did you learn in that room? Probably not much. And so that relationship is absolutely key for teaching, as we know that relationship is key for a whole bunch of things right across the board. And so we see relationship in the Bible. I didn't even want to pick out individual examples because it's just a no-brainer. Throughout all of history in the Bible, everything that's written, God's desire for relationship has been a constant. So ever from the beginning, God decided to make man in his image. He said that it's not good for man to be alone, so he made a female to be with Adam. And even though they sinned, God already had the ideas in motion for restoring that relationship. He already had a plan for Jesus. He said that the son of Adam would stomp on his head and kill the snake. So even from the very beginning, God had relationship and that restoration in mind, because he wants to know us. He doesn't just want to have little toy soldiers that he's created. He wants to have real loving relationship with his creations that we have chosen and actively pursue, as opposed to just being brainwashed and just doing what this all-powerful God wants to do. And so that relationship's constant, it's a given. You'll see it woven throughout every book. But much of what is in the Bible can be known as the head knowledge, the facts about the thing. But it's only when we learn as heart knowledge in our heart, experientially knowing, deeply and fully, that can we, apply and know those concepts in a different way. And so that can be instilled only directly through relationship with him as he works through us and the Holy Spirit. And only then can we apply those ideas in their fullness or at a new level. There's layers to each concept that he can reveal to us as we live. And obviously we weren't created to do it alone. We can see these days with social media, we're more connected with ever, but more people are lonely than ever. And we see the negative impacts of that. We're clearly related to live in relationship and in community with each other. And this is just another thing that demonstrates that. And so relationship with others, again, that's a no-brainer. I don't even need examples here. So Matthew, it says, what are the most important two commands? Love God and love others, right? Relationship with others, done. It's right up there, super important. And it's important too, because if our goal is to share and connect with others, it's only in strong relationship does it provide opportunity to speak. And so it's only through that depth of connection, understanding, respect, can we share something new, something meaningful that others might be open to taking on it and really thinking about and going, yeah, you know what, I can see where you're coming from there. And so relationship is the key to communication, key to sharing, key to learning. It's just buried in all we do. And we see that God, even he's in relationship with himself as the Trinity. And so he models that, and he's made that an intrinsic part of who we are when we reflect his image. All right, so that is it today. So we've looked at how teaching is how it happens specifically in a classroom, at school. And we've also seen how God uses teaching in his relationship with us as he walks through us, but also how we can teach or share with others around us as well. And so we looked at the different ways, some different teaching concepts to do that. So the first one is chunking, not to bite off more than you can chew, to do things in discrete steps and discrete chunks. Looked at the idea of differentiation, where everyone is different. We all have our own unique needs and ways of doing things. And so for us to pick up new things and to learn and to grow, we all do that in different ways. We also looked at how stories, that they're an intrinsic fabric to our society and how our brains are really hardwired to learn and to see really complex things working together in action so we can learn from. Then lastly, relationship is key, both to learning, but to connecting with God and connecting with others. So that's it for today. Thank you all for coming along. Do appreciate it. That's the end of Simon Says for this year. It's been a privilege to share with all of you, and I pray that you've really gotten something out of it, and that you continue to moving forward. I'm not sure what the future looks like just yet, but thank you for the journey so far, and God bless. I'll see you guys around. Thanks.